Greetings, you're listening to Horror Nerds at Church, a ridiculously queer podcast where we take a deep dive into a horror film or a book and talk about how it connects to queerness, religion, and theology. My name is Pace Warfield, and I am a surprisingly low midichlorian count for a human.
And I'm Pastor Emily, and I am a horror Padawan with a surprisingly high midichlorian content.
And I am Claudia Gray, daughter of Ferrex.
Love it. And for our book mini season, you do not have to have read the books to follow along. We won't reveal major spoilers without reading. Listen instead for some flavor of the books, some of the lore in them, and what kind of treasures await if you pick up the book yourselves from your local bookshop or library.
And today we have with us, as she already introduced, Claudia Gray. Claudia Gray. Claudia Gray is the pseudonym of Amy Vincent. She is the writer of multiple young adult novels, including the Evernight series, the Firebird trilogy, and the Constellation trilogy. In addition, she's written several Star Wars novels, such as Lost Stars and Bloodline. Her debut adult historical mystery, The Murder of Mr. Wickham, released in May 2022. She makes her home in New Orleans with her husband Paul and assorted small dogs. Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you guys for having me.
I was thrown off because, I was a little thrown off because I did not realize it was a pseudonym, and then I was like, oh.
Claudia is fine. It doesn't sound like it's not me anymore. I've been going by it for more than a decade. It's like a nickname.
Nice.
Nice.
Well, thank you again so much for being here. I know it's a busy time of year for you. We were just talking before you press record about how it's convention season, so I'm sure you're traveling all over.
Yes. I just got back from Poland a week and a half ago, I think, which was great.
Oh, wow.
Copernicon in Torun. It was really, really awesome. Next up, I think, is Olathe, Kansas. And after that, New York, and after that, Dallas. So
cool.
I think Olathe is like a Kansas City suburb. So,
Well, I do not have many announcements right now, except the big one, which is our pet costume contest, which we do every year. This is our third annual one. Our submissions are open until midnight, October 20th. That's midnight Eastern time. And we'll give you a week to vote after that, and then we'll announce winners on October 31st. We still haven't quite figured out what the prizes are going to be this year, but it'll be something special. Last year we gave out Blu-rays of movies and stuff, so we'll probably do something that ties in with Star Wars, because it is our upcoming Star Wars and Alien season for whomever wins. So submit those to us. You can email your submissions at horrornerds@church@gmail.com, or check the show notes for a link to submit them through a Google form.
I'm excited. I've moved from contestant with my basil plant. You can use plants or stuffed animals in this contest to judging the contest. So it feels especially exciting for me.
I've been looking at pet costumes the last few days, not so much for Halloween, but when Mardi Gras comes in New Orleans, there's a parade called Barkus, which is the parade of costume dogs. And if you're really doing it, you dress in theme with your dog. And last year, very on point, for this podcast, Peaches was the Pope and I was a nun. But I don't know, torn between a few different possibilities for next year. But whatever it is, we'll take some dog costume that's going to be rapidly discounted on November 1st. And then we have to build some sort of float or contraption in that theme thereafter.
That sounds amazing. And I've never wanted to be at Mardi Gras really ever, because I'm an introvert. But now I'm like, That actually sounds like fun. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's a
Someday.
week and a half before that Tuesday. It's still very much primarily locals, and people come out. They bring their dogs. Treats are handed out throughout. Basically, to the dogs, it's the best walk ever.
I bet.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, it has been so awesome to get you on to talk about some of the stuff. Right now, we are doing a book mini season before we get into our main. We usually cover movies on the podcast, and we're going to be covering the Star Wars franchise and the Alien franchises starting in January, which we initially pushed back because of the Writers Guild strike. And SAG-AFTRA strikes. So we decided we'll cover some books, and who better to have on to talk about some Star Wars and also a little bit of horror novels. I know you've written some vampire YA fiction and stuff. So I'm really excited for this conversation. A question that we ask all of our guests, kind of the signature question of Horror Nerds at Church, is do you have a real life church horror story? It can be supernatural, like a haunting, or we've had someone tell exorcism stories before on here. But more often it's just church people being shitty or unkind to one another, harmful theology. However you interpret that question.
Horror was felt. I don't think anybody actually did anything wrong here. But you'll understand why I say this. This actually happened to a friend when they were young, but they were about, I don't know, tween age, whatever. And the church, Southern Protestant Church Baptist, I think, was going to put on a passion play with people from the congregation starring in the parts. And for some months, maybe a year or two, a man who was an ex-convict, who had seen the proverbial or literal light and was with the service. Well, he was one of the very few who had long hair and beard, as iconography insists Jesus did. And he really wanted to play the part. And the pastor was a little wary. Why, I don't know, but it was like, no, this is really what this ought to be about. This guy ought to be able to do this, and this is going to be fantastic. And so he gets the part. Everybody's very excited, and nobody has thought through the fact that the prison population has slightly more tattoos than the average. Okay. Less so now, but still more. Anyway, and when they did preliminary rehearsals, everybody's wearing sweatpants or regular clothes, whatever. And so they did not discover this until dress rehearsal right before the big day, when our Lord presented himself to be on the cross, and written on his chest in like really big red letters is "Born to Lose." Which I think theologically you can defend, but
I was right. There's a theological justification for that, but
but it was not what they had been going for, shall we say?
Particularly, I think like Southern Baptist, like
"Born to Lose." Yeah, I think they ended up just doing a cloth artfully, as one does, but just the horror of the pastor upon the reveal of this has always stayed with me.
I love it.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Makes me think of one of Kay's friend of the podcast. Her favorite passion stories is about the passion bread Jesus. I don't remember if you remember that, Emily, but we'll make sure that's linked in the show notes too. The Tumblr, it went around Tumblr back when Tumblr was still a thriving community, about this woman who baked a giant Jesus mayo bread but stuffed him with like jelly and all that stuff, and then the ensuing chaos that happens on their Easter passion play when this happens. So
oh dear.
And there's blood.
Yes.
In the form of jelly. Yep. Yeah, that's funny. That's a beautiful, like, I love that because it is both gets at the realness of like our lives and stuff,
Yeah.
and the like theological born to lose, like that,
Yeah, you
yeah.
could keep that, you could roll with that, but you can also see why that was 100% not expected.
Yep. Yeah. So, Claudia, what got you into writing?
Um, let's see, I always loved stories and books, and I always sort of dreamed like that was always a dream thing to get to be a writer. But I also it just, it's like a dream of being a figure skater, sure, great, but it did not seem even remotely like a thing that was likely or possible in my life. Never took a writing course or anything, not fiction writing anyway, which is wild to me in retrospect. But um, then I went to law school, as people tragically do. And the same year that I went to law school, and I'm really dating myself here, the X Files came on, and
Mm.
mass use of the internet got started. And I was one of the early people hopping on to that. And so very early on, I was finding sort of the first online fanfic communities. Of course, fanfic goes way farther back than that. And I had even had some paper Star Trek zines back in the day. But
Love it.
I know. But I hopped in and began writing fanfic, and at first it was really bad fanfic, and then it became mediocre, and it got better, and I started writing it about other shows and books and movies, and then I had my first novel length idea, and after I'd completed that, and I knew that I had, okay, this is as much story as it takes to fill 90,000 words, and this is this is what it feels like. That's kind of the heft of it. These are the subplots. Like, okay. From that time on, I knew like it was worth giving it a shot. It was still another 4 years before I really seriously pursued publication. But from that time on, I knew that it was something I wanted to do and believed it was something possible.
Nice. That's
That's
awesome.
awesome.
I love the fanfic, like path fanfic to like published author pipeline that exists.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
huge. And also, and this is less credited, but one very much follows the other, the pipeline from fanfic to editor.
Mm. Hmm.
A
Mm.
lot of people who love words and stories, this is who goes into this.
Yeah.
And, fan fiction, when I first got into it, was still a very fringe thing. And it really isn't considered that so much
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
What is it? Archive of Our Own is one of the most visited websites in the entire world, which is phenomenal. So I've repeatedly run into editors who read fanfic. One editor had acquired my book, and we were well into editing it before I mentioned something and about fanfic. She was like, "Oh, what did you do?" And I told her, and she was like, "Oh, you wrote that story that I loved about X and Y." She hadn't realized we were the
Nice.
same person. So, yeah, the community is very, very fanfic heavy.
That's
That's
awesome.
awesome.
Kind of related, as you're talking about X Files and stuff being an early inspiration. When was the first time you watched any of the Star Wars films or media? Do you remember that specifically, or do you just kind of always have it in your
Again,
periphery as your?
this question comes along every so often, and it's so disturbing to me because that I have to recognize that there are generations of people for whom the answer could be something other than, of course, I was taken to see the first movie as a child when it came out. Like
Hmm.
Yeah.
that's not at all true anymore. But to me, it still feels like, well, of course, when everybody else did. But yeah, it came out the summer I turned 7, which is a great, great year to just absolutely fall into that completely. And so it was always a huge part of my childhood and adolescence, had the first generation action figures that I wish we'd saved, had the old Death Star
Right.
base
Right.
set. Yeah. I still have my Star Wars Galactic Passport, the little
Oh.
paper thing with
Yeah.
stickers. for the different planets because they didn't have all the planets named. I, made some with pen and crayon and whatever and glued them in there so that I could be like, yes, Bespin too. Things like that. Started reading the old EU books the minute they came out, was at Walden Books in the mall, like I always like to say, grabbing my Timothy Zahn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's fantastic. A nerd through and through, for
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Oh, yeah.
So, do you have favorite characters? And, like, I know Pace and I talk about this because Pace has read more Star Wars books than I have. But, like, favorite could be just movie or just book or, like, a favorite in the whole universe.
I mean, if I have to name one, it is, of course, going to be Leia. I mean,
Naturally.
we're still on the lookout for brave and feisty and incredible female characters. But man, back in the 70s, like she appeared in the middle of the desert like an oasis. This
Literally.
phenomenal creature. You think she's sort of the damsel in distress, and then the minute they rescue her, of course, she's mouthing off and grabbing the gun and taking charge, which is awesome.
Right.
That said, I have loved so much of this mythos over so many years. I mean, a year and change ago, I would not have been able to put the characters from Andor on this list, and they're literally all on it, like down to like Cloris, the chauffeur. Like they're all on it now.
I love it.
Yeah, it keeps evolving, and there keep being things that draw me in.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite Star Wars character to write?
Leia is fun to do.
Okay.
I really enjoyed
sure
writing Qui-Gon as well. Honestly, the only one that I found really hard to write, and I found it very hard, was of all people 3PO. Well, thanks to Anthony Daniels, he's this wonderful, like he walks this line between being really annoying and really endearing. And if you don't have Anthony Daniels there to say the lines for you, all of a sudden it could just really veer into the annoying. So it took a bit of nuancing and also weirdly exclamation points, because everything he says he thinks is the most important thing ever. So like
it's true. It's true.
Exclamation points I've ever used in prose went to 3PO.
That is amazing.
That's fantastic. I read Anthony Daniels' book. I don't remember what it's called right now, but he did like an autobiography thing on like his time in Star Wars as C-3PO, and it's fascinating to me because as just like a regular old fan, I had no idea, but like then looking back, I'm like, yeah, they really erased Anthony Daniels from C-3PO in publicity and all of that stuff. So I love that you're like specifically naming him because he played C-3PO for all of them and like did it so well.
I have to emphasize though, and this is another thing that, like this was still the 70s, it's still the monoculture. And I can't stress how huge it was. I mean, the person who played like the fifth banana on a mid-range sitcom back then would be recognizable to more people than all but the very biggest stars today. Like it was everything. So yeah, they didn't really put Anthony Daniels front and center, and everybody knew Anthony Daniels played 3PO. Everything everywhere for years, the entire time. It was a pop culture hit. I haven't seen anything else remotely like it, and I don't expect to.
Yeah, it's true.
Awesome. What I wonder, like, how did you get involved with writing Star Wars specifically? Like, were you approached, or did you have a concept to go with them with, or how did that all work?
They approach you as a rule. You can pitch concepts, and maybe they'll get picked up, but Lucasfilm has its own publishing concept sort of worked out. So they come to you. Yeah. You have to have, your own track record, not only so that they know how you write, but They know you can respond to edits in a professional way. You can handle yourself at a public event, all this sort of stuff, and know that you write fast, which I do. So, but to get back to what we were talking about earlier, the editor who got me for it, I mean, she knew that I wrote fast and she knew that I was a Star Wars fan who understood the mythos. And one of the reasons she knew that is because we met on Alt TV X Files Creative back in like 1995. So,
I love
yeah,
Nice.
fanfic for the win.
it.
What was it like then? Because you have like Star Wars novels that you have written, but then to write for like from a certain point of view, what was that like? Because that's 40 plus authors.
Mm-hmm.
Like, did you collaborate? Did you each just like, yeah?
Yeah, we didn't collaborate. The whole idea with those ones, opposed to all the other books, the from a certain point of view stories are maybe canon, maybe
Yeah.
not. So they didn't have to totally line up. I got involved in it really late because I think I'd just finished writing Princess of Alderaan when it came around. And so pretty much everybody else, it was like name a character, and I would name any character and they're all taken. I mean, everything is in that book. And so finally I was like, Qui-Gon. And they're like, Qui-Gon's not in this. I was like, I beg to differ. And made an educated guess. Now, that said, Kevin Scott, who wrote Obi-Wan, we both wrote sort of Force ghostiness the same way, and a lot of people thought we had collaborated. And of course, we've collaborated on things since, but we did not. We just think the same way about it. And that set me up to get to write Master and Apprentice later. And also, I was really happy that the Kenobi show, the whole time I was like, oh, are they going to undo it? Are they going to undo this? And they didn't. It worked perfectly with that story.
Yeah.
Nice. That's awesome. Do you have a favorite story from the volume in addition to your own?
Oh, yeah. My favorite by far, and I never know how to pronounce this. Is it the Dianoga? The Dianoga? The trash compactor?
Oh, yeah. I think it's Dianoga, but I don't know. It's one
Uh,
of those I've only read too.
Honestly,
So
give it, they say Han and Han. Pronunciation on vowel sounds doesn't seem to be something they get hung up on in the Star Wars universe. So,
yeah.
yeah, that story I think is amazing. It's genuinely sci-fi in a way that Star Wars, as a rule, is not. And yet it's totally Star Warsy. And I'm like, this creature is so misunderstood. But it made me really, really feel something for a character that I would not even have thought was a character. So,
Yeah.
For sure. And you talked a little bit about this, but what gave you the idea of focusing on Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon's relationship in this, both the story, but also how you expanded that into the novel Master and Apprentice?
well, for the story, it had struck me what a moment that is for Obi-Wan. And as we've gotten more canon, like it really, the fullness of it really hits you what's going on for Obi-Wan with this, because it's not just Luke showed up. Obi-Wan's
Yeah.
known for the past 2 decades that he's going to get pulled back into this again. The moment's going to happen. And when Luke shows up and he sees that hologram, he knows it's now. He knows this is it.
Yeah.
I'm
Mhm.
getting pulled back into it. And then Luke runs off to danger, runs away. And I was like, Obi-Wan had to be beside himself, force serenity or no, because everything's on the exact point of happening or not happening, triumph or disaster. It's right there. And so I thought, okay, we know from Revenge of the Sith that Qui-Gon had begun to make contact with other Jedi Knights, with Yoda at least back then. Obi-Wan knows how to Force Ghost. It seems to be a thing. So I was like, okay, I think he would have communed with Qui-Gon. And at the end of Revenge of the Sith, we're told that Obi-Wan's going to try to do that, to reach out to Qui-Gon in that way. And so I thought that would be sort of the perfect moment to have them talking. with this, and they liked the story basically, which is why they came to me with Master and Apprentice, the idea for the book. Or rather, with the book, they were like, "Write something about Qui-Gon," and I was like, "Okay, what?" And they're like, "Well, about 5 years before the Phantom Menace, go." And I was like, and I actually had a lot of trouble coming up with plot because I wasn't that I didn't know what to say. It was that I wanted to say so much. I wanted to write like
Yeah.
a 5-volume biography of Qui-Gon Jinn, and they were like, "That's not on the schedule. Please pick a story."
Okay, I guess. Yeah.
That's amazing. I feel like Qui-Gon is one of those characters, kind of like I would say Obi-Wan was in the original trilogy, but Qui-Gon especially for the prequel trilogy, where he just like appears and then disappears, and there's just so much of his
Hmm.
past life and that is hinted at, but you never really get to explore. So it's really fun to get to read that, to read your take on what was going on in his life and in his and Obi-Wan's relationship and stuff.
Yeah, it was really fun. Also, that was another area where Kevin Scott and I um, collaborated because while I was writing that book, he was writing Dooku Jedi Lost, really great audio
Ah,
book. And
yeah.
we realized right away if we got the backstories aligned with what went on with Dooku and Qui-Gon, because Master and Apprentice has two meanings with that. You go and flashback to that as well. If we lined those up and made it consistent and wove it in together, that that fans would love it, and Lucasfilm would also be excited to go and take that. So they did.
So so within the High Republic, I'm curious, what are some of the themes that are kind of woven into the High Republic as you interpret them, and how those themes kind of unfold in your work specifically with that?
I try very hard not to think too much about things like theme. I feel like that tends to work best when you realize it. I mean, for instance, the first High Republic book, Into the Dark, I had finished the first draft before I realized, oh, this is a book about grief. I didn't know
Mm,
that going in. And I think if I had known it going in, it would have probably, at least at first, come across really heavy handed.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times it's better to let that, like develop and come out as you go. I do know that what we
Hmm.
wanted to do was show what Obi-Wan talks about in A New Hope when he says that the Jedi were the guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy for 1,000 generations. Okay. And we never really see that. We get to the prequels, the cracks have already appeared. Something isn't right. So we wanted to show the order when it's still at the height of its confidence, and it's actually working the way it's supposed to work. And in some ways, that's harder to write than the flawed.
yeah.
You know, what would this look like? And we decided early on, the idea of that confidence. There isn't that same sense. There's only one right way to be a Jedi. It's not as hierarchical. You do have the main temple in Coruscant, but there are other temples that do their own thing. You have the concept of the way seeker, somebody who feels like they need to go off and follow the force in their own direction for a while, and the
Hmm.
order will happily welcome them back after that. It isn't a thing
Yeah.
like we see. This is not an organization that would have drummed Ahsoka Tano out. You know, this might have been an organization that handled Anakin a little bit better, but we wanted that sense of it. There's no sense of threat, ergo people are freer to do more things, and it let us have. Of course, we have a ton of Jedi in it. We have so many Jedi, and remembering whose saber is what color is so hard. Thank you for existing. Um,
You gotta
it
have
was
like
fun.
one of those charts, like the flow chart of
Yeah,
how they got the
yeah.
lightsaber colors, right?
But it was fun to be able to like create so many different personalities and so many different perceptions of the force and methods of behavior, and have all of those be really joyously accepted within the group, because uh there isn't yet a sense of like, oh, we're all going to wear this thing and do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that too, and and you did say about how many Jedi there are, but also just the richness of the non-Jedi characters, even to like the conscious rock Geode, who's one of my favorite characters in the High Republic. Just really cool
Yeah,
expansiveness there.
he's not a rock. He's a Ventian. It's just very hard to tell the difference between a rock and a Ventian.
Yes, thank you.
That's fantastic.
Yep.
That actually gets into, so we are horror nerds at church,
Uh-huh.
and would be remiss if we didn't talk about some of the religious stuff
Mm-hmm.
in the Star Wars universe. And I think partly what, as I'm listening to you describe like the shift for the Jedi, I'm like, this is what has happened in the church. We
Mm-hmm.
are like scared that we're gonna die, so now we're closing ranks, and like everything becomes more rigid. And I'm curious what how you understand the Jedi in terms of religion, like whether you would actually say like, yes, this is a religious tradition, a religious order, and how religion kind of even more broadly plays out in the Star Wars universe.
Well, I mean, I think to some extent the downfall of the Jedi is made possible by the fact that what was a religion ceases to be one. Um, I mean, I I don't think Yoda says one wise or profound thing in the prequels once. He's just
It's true. It's
so
true.
eloquent and amazing in Empire Strikes Back, and people have genuinely taken inspiration from that in all the decades since. And then you go to prequels Yoda, and he's just like, begun these Clone Wars have, it's uh he's not thinking like a mystic anymore. The Force seems to be very much taken for granted. It's almost like people using a superpower instead of seeking a truth. And one of the reasons I responded really strongly to Qui-Gon, and I think some others did, is that Qui-Gon still had some of that essence of the mystic. He believes in those prophecies when nobody else does. That amazing moment with the Duel of the Fates with Darth Maul, where he actually drops and meditates in the middle of a battle.
Yeah.
He's still in touch with that to some extent. The Order overall is not in the same
Yeah.
way. It just isn't. And I think hopefully in the High Republic, I mean, you still see some people who are not heavy mystics among the Jedi in that era, but they are in partnership and in community with those who are. They're kept aware of that. There's still, I think, more context for that, so that even people for whom that may not be one of their main modes of operation, they still get to consider it and touch base with it as they go. So that would be my response. Something that was a religion ceased to be one.
Yeah.
I
That,
I love that framing. Yeah.
I was gonna say, that makes a lot of sense for me. We're um as we're like pre-recording some of our season, I'm like in the middle of watching the Clone Wars show for the first time.
The Witch Show, the Clone
And
Wars.
Pace, yeah, Clone
Okay.
Wars. And Pace created like a list of like, here's how to watch it where you don't have to watch all of the terrible ones and just like get the sense of it. But there's so much that I've already been thinking about in terms of like the way the Jedi have shifted from, as you said, from religion to this other thing. But then there's also like the shifting in the Star Wars main trilogies, even of from from like that thing to
Mm-hmm.
police, which
Yeah.
is a whole other thing, and then also from police to military,
Yeah.
and like each of those, and then to just be like, where even are those origins, right? The mystic origins of, yeah.
Yes.
I know we are getting a little short on time, so I think we have one more Star Wars question to ask you, and then we can get into some of your other work. Do you want
Okay.
to ask the diversity one, Emily?
Oh, sure. So the Star Wars universe, historically, the original trilogy in particular, is very well known for the like cishet white people,
Mm-hmm.
especially like the cishet white boys, and and now we see so much more diversity in the Star Wars universe, in the shows and all of that stuff. but also especially in the books where there's a lot more space for diversity. So I'm curious how you bring more diverse characters into your works, especially thinking about like BIPOC, disabled, LGBTQIA plus.
I mean, you know, not to be obvious, but it isn't a matter of bringing diverse characters in. It's just not filtering them out. You know,
Yeah. Thanks for saying that.
you
Yeah.
know, that's what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think none of us wanted to filter anybody out. That was something that we enjoyed. And also, if we're talking about the Star Wars galaxy, this has always been my thing. People, freaking out about like gay people being in the galaxy or whatever, and it was like, this is a place where your next door neighbor can be a flying squid. It's like, you're really gonna
Right.
like be like, I'm shocked that these people are holding hands. I don't quite see that. I mean, that galaxy, so many incredible things are possible and happening all the time. And if you're going to be exploring that in its most extreme ways, it doesn't make any sense to fence yourself in on what is actually very normal, variation within humanity. I don't get that.
Yeah. I love that for reframing. Thank you for that.
And then, as I referenced before, you've written a lot of stuff that's not Star Wars,
Yes.
including the Evernight series. We
Mhm.
covered vampires for season 3 of this podcast. So, what can you
Excellent.
tell us about some of your other works?
Let's see. Yeah, Evernight got lucky enough to work on something with teenagers and vampires, mostly because of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and show up with it. Basically, the week New York Publishing was going, this thing called Twilight seems to be selling. So I came on early with young adult lit, got in on the ground floor. When unfortunately they were paying smaller advances than they did later on, but so be it. Let's see. After that, I also had a witchcraft series, the Spellcaster series, which debuted just as the paranormal boom was ending. And so I like to say that series was enjoyed by dozens worldwide. So that could have been the end of that. But while I was still working on that, I came up with the idea for the Firebird series, which is my dimension hopping series. Starts with 1,000 Pieces of You, and still one of my favorite books I ever wrote. Got to do that trilogy, have a lot of fun with that. The Constellation series comes out after that, and I actually thought about this earlier in the recording session because you were talking about how this podcast that deals with some questions of religion is going to be looking at Alien, and the whole thing for the Constellation series came out of, what if the movie Prometheus did not suck? What if it didn't?
Ah.
Yeah. I was like,
Mm.
there's an actual story about an actual religious person, not a Hollywood religious person who just happens to wear a cross, but like a person who
Thank
actually,
you. Thank
yeah,
you.
a person who actually takes belief seriously, dealing with an artificial life form. Because I've seen a lot of people ask, like, is this a person? But I never really seen anybody sit down and be like, does he have a soul? Like, what is my
Mhm.
obligation, as a person who believes what I believe, toward this form of life? And I was like, well, Ridley Scott is definitely not going to get around to that story, so I guess I'll just do it. And
Thank you for your
yeah,
service.
I had
Yeah.
a lot. And yeah, and now I'm doing my mystery series, which is, I call it my Jane Austen Agatha Christie mashup. Began with Murder of Mr. Wickham, which has characters from all 6 of Jane Austen's published novels. And then the subsequent books in the series will deal primarily with the world of one of the novels. The second one, The Late Mrs. Willoughby, came out this May, and I finished the third one, which I think we're announcing in December. And just to tie it back to the podcast, because it's a little bit farther removed from genre, but um, these are characters in a time that was more openly devout than our own, and in different ways than we necessarily recognize that. It's
Yeah.
if you read Jane Austen's letters, she virtually never talks about religion. But when she does, she is so serious and so emotional that she carries this with her all the time. At that time it was almost considered more devout not to talk about it a lot. This was a very
Yeah.
personal, private consideration. A lot of the characters, the male characters, are clergymen, and some of them take that very seriously, and some do not. And so, writing characters for whom this is a much more conscious part of how they look at the world, how they resolve issues, how they move in it. That has been that's an interesting aspect of it.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I can't wait.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am not ready.
It is
And
a
you
Yeah.
do write fast too. I was just thinking
yeah.
about like how you had how I think it was the second book and that just came out and you already have a third draft ready to go and stuff for that series. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's sort of like, oh, just one of those a year. Just, one Star Wars book a year and one kind of other book a year. And then you start to realize, oh, my year is really packed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
is the breathing space? Yep.
Yeah. The Haunted Mansion just came out, which is a one and done tale set in a version of where the Disney ride could be, which is the first book I've ever written set in New Orleans, where I've lived off and on for almost 20 years. But that was fun to get to work some local color in and explore
That's
that.
awesome.
Yeah, that was super cool to get to do. Although, if you would think that writing a Haunted Mansion book would get you a chance to go on the ride and write it a whole bunch in a row, you would be wrong. I'm still very disappointed about that.
Boo, right?
My
Luckily, I mean, I
condolences.
don't understand people who go to a Disney park and then just film themselves being on the ride the whole time. I don't understand it, but I'm grateful for it because I was able to do the virtual ride throughs over and over and over.
That's smart. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. I love that that one is set in New Orleans. I was there. I've been there a couple times, but one of the times for a church thing, and did like one of the haunted tours.
Yeah.
And it's cool to like learn more about New Orleans than just the very very basics.
Yeah, the Bourbon Street really eclipses so much of the city, and people who live here do not go to Bourbon Street unless they're going to Galatoire's or Jean Lafitte's. That's it. Those are the only things you even acknowledge existing in that
Yeah.
area. There's a lot more to explore and discover, and so it was fun having a book where the teen characters are really leading the lives kids would hear. And also, just there were little things like, I keep razzing Mike Seglain, the editor, about this, but in one of the middle grade books about the Haunted Mansion, and they were talking about each Haunted Mansion has its own canonical backstory, and which is always supposed to be a little mysterious. I didn't have to worry about meeting any other canon. They don't want there to be one story. Nobody gets to have it figured out. It's always going to be a little mysterious.
Yeah.
But I was reading one of the books about, middle grade books, supposedly about the New Orleans Haunted Mansion, and they were like, "Oh, it's in a hilly area of town, and we are very famously a soup bowl." That's
Yeah.
the city. And so, yeah, whenever I mentioned that at a New Orleans event, people are like, "That's hilarious." Yeah, it's about as hilly
I
as
love it.
Kansas around here. Yeah.
That's awesome. Are there any questions as we wrap up? Are there any questions you wish we had asked but we didn't?
Ooh, that is such a good question. The only one I can think of that comes up a lot is what happens next, I guess. I am about to start work on another High Republic book, probably my final High Republic book for Phase 3. So that'll be happening over the next couple months.
Sweet,
I am
sweet.
starting work on the fourth mystery in the Darcy and Tilney mysteries that I'm excited about. I am doing final edits on tie-in work that I can't name the property for yet. I don't know when they're going to announce it. Someday, I guess, but I'll be excited about that one. And I'm also trying to work on an original science fiction book for adults, which is a thing I haven't done before somehow. So
Cool.
I am digging in on that currently.
Nice. And we'll try and share, especially when that new one the new mystery one is announced,
Oh yeah,
from our socials, so that listeners are intrigued and want to know more can make sure that they hear more. But speaking
that'd
of
be great.
that,
Okay.
Pace.
Oh, yeah. Where is there any place where our listeners can find you, such as social media handles, your website, or anything they'd like to shout out?
I'm on social media a whole lot less, and it's good for me. But I still have, I still have a Twitter and Threads that my assistant updates. I have an Instagram. It's mostly pictures of pugs. Just be aware. Let's see. I am one of the 14 people still on Tumblr, just tumbling on.
Aw, I miss
Uh,
Tumblr.
I still really enjoy it. And what else? Oh, and I have an Instagram as well. If you go to my website, which is claudiagray.com, that's gray with an A, it badly needs updating, but it does have links to all of my social media. So wherever you follow people, you can follow there.
Wonderful.
Awesome, awesome. So thank you again so much, Claudia Gray, for joining us. That was amazing. Our next episode is going to be a special surprise for just our Patreon. So you have to be on Patreon to get this, but it's coming out Friday the 13th. So you can probably guess what it might be.
Wink, wink, wink.
Right. But our next full episode that will be on our main feed is The Exorcist with special guest TJ Tranchel. And because it looks like things are resolving with the WGA and SAG after strikes, hopefully, keeping fingers crossed, we'll hopefully be able to cover the movie, not just the book. And we'll talk about the book a little bit too for that episode. So definitely stay tuned for that one. It's going to be fun.
Indeed. And that's it for our show. Our theme music was by Matt May. Horror Nerds at Church releases every Thursday. Please comment, rate, and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Support us on Patreon and get access to exclusive video of this episode, movie commentary episodes, BooTube episodes, and more bonus content by going to patreon.com/horrornerdsatchurch. Starting at only $5 to sign up, it's way cheaper than surviving in the High Republic. Follow us on social media, Facebook and Instagram at Horror Nerds at Church, and Twitter and Blue Sky at HNACPOD for all the latest updates about upcoming films, news, and other announcements. Until next time, go to the desert, be a mystic, return to your roots.
I love it. Be a desert parent.